Welcome, dear listeners, to another journey through time. Today I invite you to immerse yourself in a story that will transport us to the arid territory of Arizona in 1883, where the wind carried promises and despair in equal measure. A narrative about seeds, not only those that sprout from parched earth, but those that germinate in the human heart when life seems to have lost all meaning. Have you ever felt completely lost, as if everything you fought for had been destroyed in a matter of days? This is the story of souls who found in the deepest desolation the beginning of an unexpected redemption. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your country? I'd love to know. And if this story touches your heart, as I hope it will, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave that like that encourages us to keep bringing you these literary pearls. Arizona Territory, year 1883. In the arid lands near Mesa Verde, the silence that descended upon Ezra Thompson's cornfields was not the sacred silence of dawn, nor the evening rest of workers. It was the silence of absolute devastation, a muteness that weighed upon the earth like a tombstone upon a grave. The ears of corn that 2 weeks ago swayed green and promising in the Arizona wind now lay shattered, gnawed to the stalk by a cloud of locusts that had passed like a biblical plague. 12 years of sweat, of bloodied knees upon dry earth, of nights praying for rain, all reduced to brown stubble that even Thunder, his chestnut mare, would not deign to smell. Ezra walked among the remains of his dreams, his boots raising small clouds of dust that dissolved in the motionless air. At 35 years old, he carried in his calloused hands and sun-weathered face the entire history of a lineage of men who had loved this arid land with the devotion of those who love the impossible. The log cabin, with its stone chimney that his father had built stone by stone, watched him with empty windows. Inside, darkness guarded memories of winters when the family gathered around the fire, planning the next season. Now, only the wind whistled through the cracks, carrying the bitter smell of destruction. But something gleamed in the distance, on the dusty horizon, something that made Ezra raise his eyes for the first time in days. A figure was approaching on horseback, and in the graceful movement of the mount, there was a strange promise that not everything in the world had been devoured. What would this mysterious apparition bring to Ezra's life? Ruth Mackenzie emerged from the trembling heat of morning like a mirage gaining substance. Mounted on her Pinto Mustang named Star, she carried across her saddle a burlap sack that exhaled the earthy aroma of dormant seeds, promises of life awaiting the right moment to awaken. At 24 years old, Ruth possessed the understated beauty of women who learn to find strength in adversity. Her light brown hair, braided with simplicity, caught golden reflections beneath her faded straw hat. The moss-green cotton dress, though mended in some places, maintained the dignity of one who does not allow difficulty to corrupt inner elegance. Ezra watched her approach, noticing how she held the reins with gentle firmness, how her eyes surveyed the devastated fields without the judgment he so feared finding in visitors. There was in her countenance an understanding born only from shared experience with the unforgiving land. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her clear voice cutting through the silence. "I'm Ruth Mackenzie. I heard about the storm that passed through here." The delicate euphemism touched Ezra. Not destruction, not tragedy, storm, as if difficulties were natural phenomena that pass, leaving behind the possibility of beginning anew. Ruth dismounted with fluid movement, and the sack of seeds whispered an ancient music against her leg. "I'm going to Copper Creek to sell these wheat seeds. The German merchant pays well for resistant varieties, but the road—" She paused, her eyes meeting his. A woman alone, Ezra understood without need for words. Bandits, Apaches, lawless men, the dangers that lurked on the territory's trails. Would this encounter be the beginning of something that would forever change both their destinies? Dawn found them riding side by side along the dusty trail that serpentined between red cliffs and sentinel cacti. Thunder and Star established a harmonious rhythm, as if they understood the importance of this improvised partnership between their riders. During the first day of travel, Ruth revealed herself to be a surprising journey companion. She knew every stone of the path, every hidden spring, every shadow that could shelter protection or danger. She was a daughter of this land as much as Ezra, but in a different way. Where he planted with stubborn hope, she observed with practical wisdom. "My father used to say the secret isn't in fighting the desert," she murmured, while they filled their canteens at a crystalline spring. It's in learning its language. Ezra watched her wet her handkerchief in the fresh water and pass it over her neck, a simple gesture that carried all the femininity that hard work had not managed to erase. There was in her a strength that did not need to shout to be recognized. When the sun began to decline, painting the sky in impossible oranges and purples, Ruth pointed to tracks in the sand. "Apaches," she said simply. "They passed 2 days ago. We'll camp between those rocks." Night enveloped them with a starry mantle and the distant sound of coyotes. Around the small campfire, Ruth spoke of the windmill her father had built, of the struggle against droughts, of the typhoid fever death that had left her and her mother alone with men's responsibilities. "These seeds," she said, touching the sack with maternal affection, "are different. They resist heat, need little water. My father got them from a traveler coming from the north." Ezra listened to every word as revelation. Here was a woman who understood not only the language of the desert, but also the language of renewed hope. What more secrets would she guard, and how would this change the course of both their lives? The Mackenzie Ranch materialized on the horizon like an oasis of hope. The windmill turned lazily against the cobalt-blue sky, its blades whispering songs of perseverance. The adobe house, whitewashed, contrasted with the red earth around it, and the wooden stable held the sweet aroma of stored hay. Martha Mackenzie emerged from the main door like a commander receiving troops. At 52 years old, she carried in her graying hair combed in a low bun all the dignity of a Western matriarch. Her apron, always impeccable despite rural tasks, waved gently in the afternoon breeze. "Ezra Thompson," she said, drying her hands on the clean fabric. "Ruth told me about you. A man who doesn't give up on the land is always welcome at our table." Martha's eyes, the same grey-green color as the horizon before a storm, evaluated Ezra with the perspicacity of one who learned to judge characters by survival necessity. What she saw must have satisfied her, for her smile transformed her entire face, revealing the beauty her daughter had inherited. During the following 10 days, Ezra found himself immersed in a world where women commanded with firm but fair hands. He repaired the windmill, built fences against coyotes, tamed 2 wild colts that Martha had bought from a passing cowboy. At night, they sat on the porch while coyotes sang their melancholic serenades in the distance. Martha embroidered by lamplight, Ruth read aloud fragments from the Bible or almanac, and Ezra simply listened, allowing the peace of that home to heal him from the wounds of solitude. It was during these moments that he observed Ruth with growing admiration, the way she organized the seasonal workers' labor, how she calculated from memory the amount of seeds needed for each acre, how she treated animals with loving firmness. But what was Martha scheming behind those astute eyes? On the 10th night, when crickets sang their nocturnal symphony and the aroma of freshly roasted coffee floated in the air, Martha finally revealed her intentions. The porch was bathed in the lamp's soft light, creating an intimate circle of confidences. "Ezra," she said, her hands pausing in the embroidery, "a man like you shouldn't wander alone through this territory, and 2 women like us shouldn't face alone the adversities that will come." Ruth raised her eyes from the book, and Ezra perceived that this conversation had been previously arranged between mother and daughter. There was in the glances exchanged between them an entire silent language of women who learned to plan for survival. "What do you have in mind, ma'am?" asked Ezra, feeling that his life was about to take a completely new direction. "Partnership," Martha replied simply. "You know the land, we know special seeds. You have a man's strength, we have generations of wisdom. We'll divide the harvest profits for 3 years. If it works, you can buy part of the property." The proposal floated in the night air charged with possibilities. Ezra looked toward the wheat fields that extended beyond the porch, golden under the full moon, and then toward Ruth, who watched him with barely disguised expectation. "My late husband's room has been empty for 18 months, Martha continued. "It's a good room with a window facing east. A man needs a place he can call home." Ruth closed the book slowly, the sound echoing like the final punctuation of an important chapter in their lives. In the silence that followed, only the wind whispered among the leaves of the cottonwood planted beside the house. Would this be the moment when Ezra would finally find the home he had always sought? 8 months of cohabitation wove between them an intimacy as delicate as a spider's web at dawn. Ezra had integrated into the ranch routine as if he had always belonged to that place, and Martha watched with growing satisfaction how the property prospered under their joint work. But it was during the wheat harvest, that something irreversibly changed in Ezra's heart. Ruth, commanding the seasonal workers with natural authority, moved among the golden rows like an ancestral dance. Her arms, bronzed by the sun, harvested the ripe ears with precise movements, and her face radiated the deep satisfaction of one who sees dreams become tangible reality. One morning, while loading heavy sacks toward the granary, their eyes met for a moment, longer than necessary. Ruth smiled, not the courteous smile of daily life, but something more intimate, more true. Ezra felt his heart race like a startled horse. Martha didn't miss the episode. During the town dance on Saturday night, she observed how Ezra and Ruth danced the polka with a harmony that went beyond music. She saw how he led her with protective delicacy, how she let herself be guided while maintaining her natural independence. It was then that Thomas Bradshaw, a prosperous landowner from the valley, approached Martha. Tall, well-dressed, with gold chains on his vest, he represented everything a practical mother would want for her daughter. His marriage proposal for Ruth was generous. Big house, financial security, social position. "You have 1 week to convince your daughter," he told her, touching the brim of his hat. "It's an offer that won't be repeated." Martha saw Ruth and Ezra sharing a moment of laughter during a waltz, and her heart divided between maternal prudence and feminine intuition. What choice would Ruth make when she discovered she had a wealthy suitor awaiting her answer? Sunset painted the wheat fields with brushstrokes of liquid gold. It was the eve of the great harvest, and the air vibrated with the promise of abundance. Ruth walked among the tall rows, checking the grain moisture, when Ezra found her. They had conversed 1,000 times in those 8 months, but never like in that moment. Ezra carried in his chest a weight that had grown gradually, like a seed that finally breaks through the earth in search of light. "Ruth," he said, his voice hoarse with contained emotion, "I need to tell you something." She stopped, a golden ear in her hands, and turned toward him with that complete attention she always dedicated to him. The wind played with a strand of hair that had escaped from her braid, and Ezra had to resist the impulse to arrange it. "I don't have riches to offer," he began, words tumbling out. "I don't have a big house or purebred horses. I only have these hands." He extended them, showing the scars of work. "And the promise that together we can build something greater than any empire." Ruth dropped the ear of corn. Her eyes, always so controlled, filled with tears that caught the last rays of sun. "Ezra Thompson," she whispered, "are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," he replied, taking a step forward. "I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, the mother of the children I want to have on this land. I'm asking that we build together the life we both dream of." For an eternal moment, only the whisper of wind in the wheat fields answered. Then Ruth smiled, that smile Ezra had learned to recognize as sun after storm. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I accept." From the house window, Martha watched and smiled, knowing her daughter had chosen true love over conventional security. How would Thomas Bradshaw react to the rejection, and what consequences would this bring? September 1884 dawned with clear skies and the promise of moderate heat. In the small wooden church of Copper Creek, decorated with wildflowers that Ruth and Martha had gathered at dawn, the entire community gathered to witness the union that was already part of local folklore. Ruth walked down the narrow aisle like a queen of simplicity. Her ivory silk dress, specially ordered from San Francisco, contrasted with the environment's humility, but harmonized perfectly with her natural beauty. In her hands, a bouquet of wild lavender that perfumed the entire space. Ezra, in the dark suit bought for the occasion, waited at the altar with emotion overflowing from his eyes. He had sold his old property to a mining company, investing every cent in expanding the Mackenzie Ranch. A second windmill was already being built, and the irrigation system promised to triple production. Reverend Miller, a good-natured man who had known both families for decades, conducted the ceremony with warm simplicity. When the moment for vows arrived, Ezra and Ruth exchanged glances that dispensed with words. There was the commitment of two souls who had found in each other the completeness they had always sought. "You may kiss the bride," declared the Reverend, and Ezra's kiss was gentle as an evening breeze. The celebration lasted until late hours. Merchants, neighboring ranchers, workers, all celebrated not just a union, but living proof that true love still flourished even in the most arid lands. Martha, radiant in the blue-gray dress she reserved for special occasions, danced with several gentlemen, but always returned her gaze to the couple. Her daughter had chosen well, and she knew the future of the Mackenzie Thompson family was guaranteed in good hands. What challenges and joys awaited them in the coming years? 5 years later, in 1889, the Mackenzie Thompson Ranch extended across 300 acres of golden land. What had begun as a partnership of necessity had transformed into the largest agricultural enterprise in the county. 2 windmills turned lazily against the horizon, and the irrigation system Ezra had designed allowed cultivation even in the driest months. The adobe house had also grown. Ezra had built 2 additional wings to accommodate the growing family. Samuel, 4 years old, possessed his father's green eyes and insatiable curiosity about everything that grew from the earth. Rebecca, 2 years old, had inherited her mother's brown hair and determined temperament. Little Joseph, barely 6 months old, completed the offspring with his gurgling and toothless smiles. Ruth, now 29 years old, radiated the serene beauty of fulfilled women. Motherhood had rounded her forms without diminishing her energy, and she continued commanding the ranch operations with the same competence as always, only now with Samuel clinging to her skirts and Rebecca crawling behind. Martha, at 57 years old, had found new vocation as Sunday school teacher. She gathered neighborhood children, her grandchildren included, on the porch for reading and catechism lessons. Her voice, still clear and firm, echoed through Sunday afternoons, teaching hymns that the children hummed during the week. One September afternoon, exactly 5 years after the wedding, Ezra walked alone through the fields of ripe wheat. The wind whispered among the ears the same ancient songs, but now he listened to them with a heart full of gratitude. He remembered the desperate man he was when locusts destroyed his dreams. How impossible it seemed at that time that life would reserve such abundance for him. But would that prosperity be permanent, or did destiny still have surprises in store? The winter of 1889 arrived with unusual severity for Arizona. Snow covered the fields for 3 consecutive weeks, something the region's elders couldn't remember having seen. Neighboring ranchers' cattle began to die, and many families faced the real prospect of hunger. It was Ruth who suggested the solution. On a morning when the thermometer marked 10 degrees below zero, she entered the kitchen where Martha prepared coffee and Ezra fed the fireplace fire. "We have enough grain to feed half the county," she said without preamble. "And we have granaries to shelter our neighbors' cattle." Ezra raised his eyes from the fire, immediately understanding his wife's proposal. Sharing their reserves would mean drastically diminishing their own financial security. But it also meant saving lives and consolidating community bonds that would last generations. "The Bradshaws lost 100 head last week," Ruth continued. "The O'Sullivans are living on potatoes alone. And the Andersons' small children—" She didn't need to finish. The image of children suffering cold and hunger touched everyone present. Martha set down her coffee cup and smiled at her daughter. "Your father would be proud," she murmured. "He always said, 'True wealth is measured by the capacity to help one's neighbor.'" Ezra nodded slowly. "We'll do it," he decided. "We'll open the granaries and distribute grain. Whoever can pay, pays. Whoever can't, pays when the situation improves." The decision transformed the Mackenzie Thompson Ranch into a center of hope for the entire region. Entire families camped in the surroundings, and Ruth organized a distribution system that guaranteed each person received their daily food quota. How would this generosity affect the family's future and their position in the community? Spring 1890 revealed the consequences of the previous winter's generosity. The Mackenzie Thompson Ranch granaries were nearly empty, and the family's savings had diminished drastically. Some neighbors honored their debts, but many others simply disappeared when the weather improved, taking with them the shame of being unable to pay. Ezra walked through the fields preparing the new harvest, mentally calculating how much they would need to produce just to recover the losses. Ruth, perceiving his concern, joined him on a golden April afternoon. "Do you regret it?" she asked, watching Samuel play among the rows of young wheat. "Never," Ezra replied without hesitation. "We saved lives. We saved families. That has no price." But the real test came when Thomas Bradshaw appeared at the ranch one May morning. The man who had tried to win Ruth 5 years before now brought a different proposal. His own property had suffered so much from the winter that he was willing to sell it for a fraction of the original value. 500 acres of good land, he said, pride wounded but necessity evident. Rivers, pastures, a house that cost $3,000 to build, all for $2,000. It was a tempting offer. Those lands would make the Mackenzie Thompson Ranch the largest agricultural enterprise in the entire territory. But $2,000 was almost all they had left after the winter of charity. Ruth and Ezra exchanged glances. Martha, who had heard the conversation from the kitchen, appeared on the porch, drying her hands on her apron. "Mr. Bradshaw," she said with dignity, "will you give us a week to decide?" When the man left, the family gathered around the dining table to discuss the future. It was a moment that would define not only their financial destinies, but also the type of legacy they would leave for their children. What choice would they make, and how would this shape the future of generations? The week of decision passed like a suspension of time. Ezra and Ruth toured Bradshaw's property, evaluated the land, examined the imposing house with its fine furniture and well-tended gardens. It was, without doubt, an opportunity that would not be repeated, but it was during a conversation with 4-year-old Samuel that the answer revealed itself. The boy, playing with wooden blocks on the porch, was building a simple little house next to an elaborate castle. "Papa," he said, raising his innocent green eyes, "which house would you choose to live in?" "Why, son?" asked Ezra, sitting beside the boy. "The little house is small, but it was made with love," Samuel replied, touching the simple construction. "The castle is beautiful, but it's empty inside." The childish wisdom resonated in Ezra's heart like divine revelation. That night, he gathered the family in the room where so many important decisions had been made. "We're not going to buy Bradshaw's property," he announced. "Instead, we're going to invest in improvements to our land. We'll build another granary, expand the irrigation system, maybe start raising horses." Ruth smiled, recognizing in that decision the man she had fallen in love with. Martha nodded with approval, remembering her late husband's words about the importance of building on solid foundations. "Furthermore," Ezra continued, "we're going to establish a community fund. Each year, we'll set aside part of the profits to help neighbors in difficulties, not as charity, but as investment in the strength of the entire region." The proposal was received with unanimous enthusiasm. They were choosing to grow organically, maintaining the values that had brought them there rather than seeking rapid expansion that could compromise their essence. But one final test awaited to truly test their determination. July 1890 brought the worst drought in 20 years. The relentless sun transformed the earth into cracked marble, and the rivers that fed the irrigation system were reduced to threads of muddy water. For 6 consecutive weeks, not a drop of rain fell in the county. The wheat fields, which promised the best harvest in the ranch's history, began to wither under the scorching heat. Ezra and Ruth worked 16 hours a day, carrying water from the deepest wells, in a desperate struggle to save at least part of the crop. It was during this crisis that devastating news arrived. The mining company that had bought Ezra's old property had discovered a silver vein. They wanted to repurchase the Mackenzie Thompson land for 5 times the original value, enough money to make them rich without ever having to plant another grain. The company's emissary, a man in a suit even in the infernal heat, spread the contract on the kitchen table. $15,000, he said, paid in cash. "You can buy better land anywhere in the country." Ruth held Rebecca on her lap, while Samuel played at the table's feet, oblivious to the magnitude of the decision unfolding. Martha served lemonade to the visitor, but her eyes never left her daughter's face. It was more money than any of them had ever dreamed of possessing. It meant security for the children, education at the best Eastern schools, a life of comfort without agriculture's uncertainties. But it also meant abandoning everything they had fought for, betraying the Mackenzie patriarch's memory, leaving behind the community they had helped build. Ezra looked through the window toward the parched fields where so many dreams had been planted. Then he looked at Ruth, at the children, at Martha. He saw in their eyes the reflection of his own feelings. "Sir," he told the emissary, "I appreciate the offer, but our answer is no. This land is not for sale." What would be the outcome of this seemingly irrational choice? 1 week after rejecting the millionaire offer, clouds finally formed on the horizon. Ezra was in the field, checking the plants that still resisted, when he felt the first drop on his sunburned face. Within minutes, torrential rain swept the county, soaking the thirsty earth and resurrecting hope. The harvest was saved. Not all of it, but enough to guarantee the family's sustenance and honor the community fund commitments. More important than that, the decision to remain on the land consolidated the Mackenzie Thompson reputation as a family of unshakable principles. 10 years later, in 1900, Ezra walked through the same fields where everything had begun, now accompanied by Samuel at 14, who had inherited his father's love for agriculture. Rebecca, at 12, demonstrated talent for numbers and already helped her mother with ranch administration. Joseph, at 11, showed inclination toward veterinary medicine, caring for animals with touching dedication. Ruth, at 35 years old, radiated the serenity of women who found their place in the world. She had become a reference for other ranchers' wives, organizing women's cooperatives and educational programs for regional children. Martha, now 62 years old, remained active and lucid, sought by young couples seeking advice about agriculture and family life. Her Sunday school had transformed into the community's cultural center. On that golden September afternoon, while observing the fourth generation of Mackenzies playing among the rows of ripe wheat, Ezra understood they had planted much more than grain. They had planted legacy, values, tradition, seeds that would continue germinating long after their bodies returned to the earth. The wind whispered among the golden ears the same ancient song, but now Ezra heard it as a hymn of gratitude, the seeds of redemption, planted on that distant day when Ruth appeared on the horizon like a mirage gaining substance, had flourished in abundance that transcended any material measure. In that moment of perfect communion with the earth and with life, Ezra knew he had found true wealth, that which is measured not in gold, but in shared love, in touched lives, in hopes renewed each dawn. For there is hope for a tree, if it is cut down, that it will sprout again and its shoots will not cease. Job 14:7.